My name is Drew Moranis. I'm with SOS Recovery Community Organization, and I'm a recovery-friendly workplace coordinator. Today in this recovery and workplace wellness presentation, we're going to cover what recovery is, employee self-care, and understanding trauma in the workplace. Section A, what is recovery? In this section, you'll be able to identify common components of individual recovery, define individual and employer recovery capital, and examine the role of employers in individual recovery, as well as the role of recovery in business. Now, what have you heard or what have you learned about recovery from substance use or mental health? What might you still have questions on? We're going to start off about recovery. Now, there's many ways to think about what recovery is, different perspectives on it, and you can devise your own thoughts on recovery. There's the clinical criteria, which is strictly reducing symptoms of substance use disorder. There's pop culture, news, media, and other forms of entertainment that we might learn about what recovery is. There's personal experience, both direct and indirect lived experience. There's also existing and historic systems of care that influence what we might think about recovery. And finally, there's a collective wisdom. This is a group of hundreds of people actually in recovery, researchers and scientists in the field that have come up with some guidelines and framework to help us understand what recovery is and how people sustain and get into recovery. One such organization put out a definition that you'll see here. This is from SAMHSA. Recovery is a process of change through which people improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. Now, this definition also coincides with this other more recent definition in 2019. Recovery is an individualized, intentional, dynamic, and relational process involving sustained efforts to improve wellness. Now, those two definitions are very similar. They both promote an increase of overall health and wellness for the whole person, not just the disease. Now, this group of experts and thought leaders has done a lot of research lately over the past couple decades, more so than ever before. In the past, recovery research has been scrutinized and scarce. But lately, they've found some statistics that tell us a lot about recovery. 9.1% of the U.S. adult population have resolved a significant alcohol or drug use problem in 2017, and 7.6% of the U.S. population had a past year substance use disorder. So what this tells us is that people more so have overcome a substance use disorder than not. From this, we can start to identify key components of recovery and devise some cornerstones about recovery, about people's individual recovery, and about maintaining that recovery. These thought leaders and these group of experts all agreed on four main domains of recovery. They are the cornerstones of any recovery from any ailment. They are health, home, purpose, and community. Now, as a workplace, you are heavily involved with the purpose and community domain of recovery. Purpose is definitely what a workplace provides for anybody's recovery, as well as a community. That's where we spend a lot of time interacting and most of our time. This group of thought leaders also came out and agreed upon a set of guiding principles of recovery. You'll find these principles in any recovery at any point. And these truths about recovery are that our recovery emerges from hope, that recovery is person-driven, that recovery occurs via many pathways. That means everybody's recovery is unique to them. My recovery is not going to be the same as your recovery. Recovery is non-linear. It is not always a straight climb upward. Sometimes it is backwards, sideways, and all directions. Recovery is holistic. It treats the whole person and the whole environment. Recovery is supported by peers and allies. Recovery is supported through relationships and social networks. Recovery is also culturally based and influenced. Recovery is supported by acknowledging and addressing trauma, which we're going to get to later on in this presentation. Recovery also involves individual, family, and community strengths and responsibility. Recovery is also based on respect. Now, one of the aspects of recovery is recovery capital. When most people think about recovery capital, they think of capital, as in business capital, as in getting the funds together to launch and sustain a business. Recovery capital is no different. It's getting the resources that you need to launch and sustain a recovery. The official definition is right here: the breadth and depth of internal and external resources that can be drawn upon to initiate and sustain recovery from severe alcohol and drug use problems. Now, you'll see there's two different kinds, internal and external. We're going to go through both of those. So what are some examples of internal recovery capital? Well, they're the personal internal recovery capital. Things like physical health, financial assets, health insurance. Also things such as values, knowledge, and how you feel about yourself, your level of self-esteem. These are all components that are within an individual and reside within an individual. Now, these all may be influenced by outside factors, but this type of recovery capital comes from within and can be built upon. Now, as far as external recovery capital, there's 3 different categories. What are some of those? Well, there's family and social external recovery capital. There's intimate relationships, there's family relationships, social relationships, as in work, school, and church. There's the presence of others in recovery, so community. And there's also access to recovery support outlets. Another form of external recovery capital is community-based. So active efforts to reduce stigma, what's going on around you, what's going on within your community, to lower that stigma, to make a more welcoming environment so that people can get the access that they need for recovery services. Visibility and diverse recovery resources, a full continuum of addiction treatment resources. Some areas may have an abundance of one type of recovery, but lacking in another. Knowing what those are and what you need to access can be important. There's also local recovery community support institutions, such as the one I work for, SOS. There's also employee assistance programs, which we'll touch on in just a little bit. But this is something that most workplaces can work on as a benefit to their employees. And there's also professional assistance programs. Now, a final component to external recovery capital is cultural. What this means is that there's recovery resources that speak to me, that I'm attracted to. For instance, if I want to follow through with recovery resources that have the same religious base as I do, or are the same sexual orientation, I tend to be attracted to those more so. So that's what cultural external recovery capital means, something that speaks to you as an individual. Now, as a business, you can go and take this recovery capital scale. What this does is ask you questions such as, does my organization foster a non-stigmatizing environment for those in recovery? Or do I have policy in place that addresses behavioral health factors and substance use disorder? These are questionnaires that can be found online, and you can take them for any organization or business to find out what your recovery capital is for your particular organization. Here's a question. This is a tricky question. How does a person recover? It's a bit of a trick question because, as we went over earlier, our guiding principles of recovery is that recovery is found via many pathways. It is highly individualized. My own personal recovery is not going to be anywhere near someone else's recovery, or it could be similar, but it's never going to be exactly the same thing. So that question's something to ponder over, but we don't really have definitive answers, and we'll get to that in a little bit as to why. But you can formulate your own opinions on recovery and your own thoughts. Now, does the workplace have a role in recovery? Yes, absolutely. Going back to those 4 domains of recovery, those cornerstones, purpose and community, are what work is all about. That's where we reach people, and that those 2 domains of recovery can have a great influence on one's recovery. Now, does recovery have a role in the workplace? Yes, it absolutely does, both tangibly and for the people in recovery. And we'll go over more of that in just a little bit. Now, as these factors go, as they increase and decrease, you'll notice that the 4 domains of recovery, personal, social, community, and purpose, as they increase, so do recovery capital and protective factors. But as these domains and principles working together, as they decrease, problems and problem severity tend to increase. So this is just a way to establish a framework and a guideline for professionals and everyone else that is involved with recovery to kind of monitor and get more involved with their recovery. Now, there's been a lot of questions we've all asked ourselves over the years about recovery, and unfortunately a lot of them don't have definitive answers. Questions like this: why didn't treatment fix it? Why didn't consequences prevent or fix it? And whose responsibility is it anyways? These questions have not produced definitive results. Instead, with recent research over the last few decades or so, we've learned to ask ourselves these questions in a different way, as in, how do we nest the process of prevention or recovery within this person's natural environment? And how can I change my approach to benefit the both of us? These are questions that we can work on and build on to understand recovery better. Now, some considerations for employers. If you're dealing with a large group of employees or an employee of just one, just yourself, you can take some of these into consideration to hopefully foster a better environment for those employees dealing with mental health or substance use issues. And it also has a viable return for your organization, which we'll see in just a little bit. But some considerations for employers. Employment is definitely a top priority for people in recovery. A 2012 study showed that employment was consistently the second most frequently mentioned priority for people in early recovery, right behind a place to live. So it is very important, especially in early recovery, that people establish a purpose, one of the 4 domains. And from that purpose, they can actually get a community out of that. Employment can also be a key indicator as to where somebody is at with their substance use disorder and recovery. Some more considerations for employers: anticipate and prepare. So treatment for employees has resulted in increased productivity. That benefits the employer greatly, especially in the long term. It also produces decreased absenteeism, often resulting in a 23% return on investment for employers that provide insurance that has treatment options available. You can also ask and respond. People in recovery oftentimes have other engagements, they have priorities, they may even have appointments that they must attend. So by being a little bit flexible and allowing them to get the treatment they deserve and treating it just like any other ailment can also have a massive return of investment. Some more considerations for employers. Stay flexible. Like we just mentioned, people in recovery or dealing with mental health might have certain obligations that they need to meet, or certain appointments, or certain needs. This is no different than any other medical condition. And if employers can stay flexible and try to accommodate these, you will see a vast improvement in productivity. There's a focus on retention. Second chances and loyalty offered within reason can pay absolutely limitless dividends for the employer. Employers can cultivate trusted, high-performing employees by investing in their development. And these are actually backed up with some data. In 2017, employees that disclosed that they were in recovery missed an average of 9.5 days per year and only had a turnover rate of 21%. Those that did not identify as being in recovery missed 10.5 days a year with a turnover rate of 25%. So you actually see you do gain a valued employee by fostering a culture of recovery in your workplace. And please don't underestimate or assume. People in recovery are defined by their ability to adapt. And we're about to watch a video that will tell you just exactly how skilled people in recovery can be at adapting, thinking on the fly, and taking initiative.